My name is Mark Miller. I'm the managing director, creative person of Story Garden Publishing. Creative director. So it says so out there on the board. I'm the person who's in charge of the direction of all the books, come up with a lot of the concepts, but work hand in hand with multiple authors. And Diane Callahan, our managing editor, asked me to maybe give a little peek behind the curtain on how we do things here at Story Garden. Peek behind the curtain, that's a little Oz reference there, and anybody who knows what's going on behind the scenes already knows that there is a Oz retelling in the works that will show up in either a few months from the filming of this video or is already out there in the wild, depending on where you are in the current timeline. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about was characters. How do we at Story Garden Publishing create our many unique and diverse characters? And not just where do we come up with the ideas, which obviously we can't really say that because nobody really knows where the ideas come from. I suspect for some people it's a little green fairy that floats through the window, lands on their head at night, and taps the idea into their mind. For some people like Casey Norton, it's because they're cracked like an egg and all those thoughts just kind of seep in and we end up with some, well, if you've read a few of her more extreme works, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And then there's Mary McHugh, who is the kind of person who probably gets her ideas in the shower while she still has her socks on. I've read that in her bio. And then we have Hero Bowen, our English connection, and I think they're assigned so many ideas at birth. You know, that's how they do it in the UK. And luckily, she had so many, she was able to sell us a few too. But if you already have that, you've already had your idea, we're going to go over how we do it, how we assemble those characters, how we create those here at Story Garden. As you're looking at the board behind me, it looks complicated. It looks thick, and that's because it sort of is. We actually over-create our characters here, and that's because you never know which author is going to be first drafting this, so you want them to have all the knowledge and the access. You want them to access of all the knowledge that you can, so that they know why the characters are doing what they're doing, what their personalities are, what their quirks are, what their flaws are, etc., etc. Will every one of the writers use every little bit of this? No. Should you use every little bit of this? Absolutely not. This is for crazy people. The only thing missing here is the little red lines of yarn indicating where the serial killer is currently hiding. But I'm going to give you the breakdown anyways because, well, I'm scared of Diane. And so when she says, can you do this? What she means is, do this or I will slash your tires. So, in no particular order, we have name, verb, core trait. You know what? This isn't a particular order, but this is not the order we're actually going to go over it. Goal, motivation, conflict, want, need, notes, quirk, minor flaw, major flaw, and history. The characters are sort of right up here to this sword. Everything in that direction is how we build the initial concept for the characters. Now, is this all the information for the characters? No, actually. In point of fact, this is more of the beginning of the characters. They will flesh themselves out more as the outline gets deeper and deeper. And then the writer is going to breathe life into them and bring their own personality, their own voice, their own emotions, and how they filter that into these characters and how those characters filter it back into the writer in a little bit of a circle. But for now, let's talk about the most important thing up here, and that is the character name. All right, maybe that's not the most important thing. There might be some slightly more important things like their flaws, their personality. But because it's the first thing on the board, I just assume it must be the first thing. And I tell you, there really is there is kind of a need for it. You don't have to do it right away. You don't have to sit there and come up with every single character name right out of the gate. But at least for your hero and your heroine, if you're writing a romance, or your hero and your hero, or your heroine and your heroine. Man, come up with names, because saying hero 1, hero 2, heroine 1, heroine 2, not very fun, and can actually get kind of confusing. And when it comes to names, one of the things I recommend, if it seems like I'm on all kinds of tangents, it's because there's no script for this. And Diane should have wrote me one. But one of the things I really recommend for when you're naming is, if necessary, just name their personality. If somebody is somebody's angry guy, then it's angry guy. If somebody is hurt guy, it's hurt guy, etc., etc. And that can give you a little bit of a cheat for a while until you're ready to actually go with the actual names that make sense. Another thing I recommend for names is, if you're writing fantasy, avoid the X's and the Z's and the unpronounceable. Remember, this might be an audiobook someday, and your audio narrator is going to want to put a bullet in the back of your head if you have Mitzelblick's Honorbahn as the main hero, and they insist on being called Mitzelblick's Honorbahn every single time. I can't say it a third time or it'll appear. So, we have, in this little sample we have here, is a series we're working on called Outriders of Oz. And so a little bit of a fun little thing we're doing with in the Ozian world. And our very first character is Ozma. So I'm breaking the very first rule right out of the gate. There's a Z in that. But Ozma, if you know anything about Oz, Ozma is important to spell that the right way. And then we have things like Gilly Whitehand here and Big Brace, Fire Talk, etc. Now this is for a young adult action adventure kind of thing, so it's not going to be too detailed, and these aren't going to be your War and Peace characters with deep layering to them. These are going to be more of what you're going to see here is more of the tricks we use to make them feel real until the author can kind of find them and truly make them real. Now on this one, I don't need, since I'm probably going to end up writing this one, I don't need to go kind of this deep. But if, let's say, Mary McHugh was going to write it, she needs this stuff. And we need her to have over too much stuff because we don't know who's going to write it. Mary might write it. Hero might write it. Casey Norton might write it. And then we have one or two other writers who've come and gone along the way, and we don't know. So because of that, it's time to overdo it. So now we have our names chosen. We're going to skip the green cards for now. I don't know if you can read it on home, probably not, but that actually says verb. It's a little cute cheat I like to use, but it doesn't have to be used at all. It just helps me when I'm plotting. Core traits, those are the blue cards. Pink is GMC, goal, motivation, conflict. I'm not going to go into goal, motivation, conflict. There are incredible minds out there who have gone over this and know exactly what they're doing, and I don't, so I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. Purple line is what we call want needs. Yellow is just our general notes. Orange is quirks. Light blue is minor flaws. Major blue is major flaws. And this pink is the actual character history. So that is the names of each of these little collared columns that you see here. And then the way it works is your card for Ozma goes across, pop, 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 pop. So that's her verb, that's her core trait, that's her quirk, etc., etc. But then Wolf down here, that's their goal, motivation, conflict, that's the notes, that's the minor flaw, etc., etc. A lot of these cards aren't filled out because we're still building this particular narrative. So I'm going to skip verb for a minute. I'm going to skip core traits for a minute, goal, motivation, conflict. I'm going to go all the way over here to minor flaw and major flaw. And these are the first kind of blushes, although it's on the far right. It is sort of what we look for in the initial building. And if we can't figure it out, they're minor flaw and major flaws. If we can't figure those out as we're building the characters, we go to our history and we ask ourselves, what's the history of this character? And did they suffer a house burning in their youth and were transient for a long period of time? Are they orphans? Did they? Is there somebody wanting to get information out of them and has been chasing them across the country? What have you? You build your history, and it can be as little detailed or as highly detailed as you want, and that might help establish the minor flaws and major flaws. We like to kind of do the flaws a little earlier than the history, because that will sometimes explain, it will backwards research it for it, backwards create it for us. This character has a lack of self-esteem. Well, what causes a lack of self-esteem? So we might bake that into the history, and then that's when the alchemical process starts to occur, because now this history is creating quirks, and the quirks are creating character traits, and now we know their history and their flaws, what's their goal, what's so on and so forth. So this, even though it's on the far right, this tends to be the first stuff we work on. So history, pretty easy. For major flaw, when we do the major flaws, these are what we would call a series flaw. Outriders of Oz is going to be a series. So since it's going to be a series, we need a character to have 2 arcs. We need to have a character arc inside the book where we see them wrestle with their minor flaw and get over and maybe beat that minor flaw. Then we want a major flaw that goes through the entire series. This one's deep. This is the one you want to root for your character to get better. This is the lack of self-esteem. This is your denial of self. This is somebody who is selfish. These are these big, big core flaws to a person. Those are the ones going to take an entire series. It's going to carry them through an entire series. And we hope to see an arc, but sometimes we're not. Sometimes these are going to get worse instead of better. And that's okay too. As long as there's some kind of major thing that helps the reader empathize with your character. Now for minor flaws, these could be something as simple as she needs affirmation for her activities, or Gilly doesn't quite grasp the severity of the current situation because they're, just not paying attention. So the minor flaws tend to be in the actual book, and it's something we do try to have an arc with, and we do try to say, okay, how can she get away from needing affirmation for her activities? How can we change that for her? What can happen to Ozma in the book that will create that journey for her? Because there's something satisfying about watching a character get over a flaw, to get past something. And then maybe that'll creep back up again later in a different novel, but odds are we've already tackled that. Let's go to the next book. We look at the big flaw and we say, what other minor flaws can manifest because of this major flaw here? And that becomes the minor flaw in the next book. And then as they are constantly having these minor flaws fixed through the series, the more dings they're taking, more cracks are starting to develop in their major flaw, which makes it feel like a larger journey. Now, notes is pretty, the yellow cards here, those pretty self-explanatory. There's notes. There are things that don't quite fit into a history, or things we want to preserve, that we want the writer to make sure the writer absolutely knows so that they can kind of feed it into the story. Like old Alan here has utterly fascinated and pesters Ozma for stories about movies. Ozma knows about real world movies from her friend Dorothy. And because of that, Alan is always wanting to know about these movies that Ozma is obsessed with. Those are little things or one-liners that we come up with while we're developing the characters. And when I say we, there's a couple of us who work at the office, and then several of the authors and I will Zoom together, and we will spend a couple hours each night for a little while creating the characters, creating the big concepts, and creating the big plot itself. But we'll go into that in later videos. The orange card is one of my favorites. It is the quirk. And I hear a lot of people when they're creating characters for plots, it's the quirk that they often talk about when they hand in hand, when they remember a character. Yes, you remember characters' journeys, but we'll often remember a lightning bolt on a kid's forehead. That would technically be a quirk. Or the giant tattoos on a werewolf in a book. Or a quirk where Alan, he thinks he's an actor. He's not. He's a goose, and that's kind of hard to be an actor. Ozma is always quoting 80s action hero one-liners because of her upbringing. She watched a lot of 80s and 90s action movies and likes quoting them constantly. Gilly's got a little bit of a theft problem. I forget what the technical terms is. So she's always stealing small baubles, etc., etc. These are things you can kind of pop back to as a writer to let the reader know, oh, I know which character I'm talking about. Because if somebody suddenly, if I'm describing that the person who's talking picks up a little dish, picks some coins up off of a dish on somebody's dresser and then kind of slides it in their pocket while they're talking, well, we automatically know that that was Gilly. Or if someone starts speaking thespianly, well, that's probably going to be Alan. So on and so forth. And of course, you'll always see the 80s one-liners. Sometimes these are actions, sometimes these are physical characteristics. We had one that worked really well where he was constantly smoking a pipe. That's sometimes just a quick quirk, fall back on, because you have only so many words in a novel, and you can't spend every time redescribing your characters. It becomes a little bit of a shortcut to remind the reader who they're talking to or who is interacting. Then we have our two biggest things for the novel. We have our goal, motivation, conflict, and we have our want, needs. Like I said, I'm not going to go into goal, motivation, conflict, except to say that in our series, the GMC is for the book you're in. Just like the minor flaw is for the book you are currently working on, the GMC is for the book you are currently in. I don't have any samples up here, but a sample could be our hero, the goal is to become rich. Their motivation is they were poor. The conflict could be money doesn't grow on trees. That's super simplification, obviously, but that's still what you're doing. And then by the end of the story, maybe they're rich. It's not a good goal motivation conflict, but it is one. Our hero, well, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I wish I had put some up that I could use. But the point being, that's for within the novel itself. Maybe Ozma's goal is she's trying to find a cure for somebody who's sick. And her motivation is she loves the person who's sick and wants to see them get better. The conflict is the illness is so devastating and so deeply rooted in magic, it's not like she can go get a mushroom, ground it up, and feed it to them and they're going to be better. She needs to go find a magical cure. And by the end of the book, she finds the magical cure. Maybe she doesn't, but 9 times out of 10, your GMC is going to be solved in that book. But then we have want, need, which is also like our major flaw. And that is the series want and the series need. And want, need, the way we do it here at the office, once again, take what you want out of this, leave what you're behind. You don't have to use this stuff, obviously, and this is our interpretation of things. But for us, want, need means what the character wants. If we were to ask the character privately and they trust us, they did better, we created them. Tell me what you really want, right? Just, let me know. Maybe I can help you with that. And they may say, oh, you know what? I'd like to be seen as a hero. I want to be larger than life. Not a great want, but people want what they want. It's the wish, right? But then there's the need, and that is what the character needs to have happen. Not what they want, but what should happen to them. This is where when handled right, the reader understands the need, can see what the character needs to have happen, even though the character doesn't want that. The character wants something else. And the conflict grows out of the two things. And for Ozma, she needs to embrace her humanity and quit worrying about being this larger-than-life hero. Alan's looking for acceptance and approval. He wants acceptance and approval, but he needs to find his own self-worth. Gilly wants to return to her pampered life in the Emerald City, but she needs to make her own happiness where she is, so on and so forth. These are the things that carry through the entire series. And like your major flaw, once the series is coming to a conclusion, we want to see them settle into their needs and realize that that's what they should have been looking for all along. Are all of them going to get that? No. And if everything was ever completely tied up into this nice, neat bow, it's going to make you mad. So we don't do that. There tends to be, life is messy, and even in our most youthful stories, they tend to be messy as well. And you will often also see that the major flaw will tie in to the need in some way. The reason it's a flaw is because they need to have to wrestle with it and get wrestle. I'm letting my Southern Ohio slip through there a little bit. Slip through. Now I'm slipping completely. Once again, this isn't scripted, and you can blame Diane Callahan. I would give her email address out, but people are crazy, so I'm not going to do that. They're tied together. The point is, the need often drives the flaw, or the flaw often creates the need. And when we see that conquered at the end, we love it so much. It becomes so satisfying. Have we done that with a lot of our characters? We've done it in miniature on single one-off books, but in the single one-off books, you don't get the major flaw, and we really don't handle the one need. It's more of the GMC and the minor flaw, but even that's satisfying. So there are a few books, a few trilogies and things that will be over the next year or two, will be finalized, and we're hopeful that we will have reached that, help them get over their flaw and help them embrace that need. Next, we have core traits. And the core traits are usually 2 one-word things that we like to assign to a character once the flaws, once the history is understood, once the want needs are understood, some of the notes. We think, all right, tell us about the personality. If we were to go talk, like I said earlier, if we were to talk to the hero and we were to say, what's your want? And they trusted this and they told us that their core traits are not. The core traits are what we would ask other people about them. We would say, hey, tell me about Ozma. Just define Ozma in a single word. And people might say, well, she's driven. She's, always going to the next adventure, always doing what's right. Some might say, she's rebellious. She steals from the rich and gives to the poor. Or if I were to ask somebody, tell me about Alan the Duck. Yeah, Alan the Duck, yes. Yes, as you can tell by some of the names here, Outriders of Oz is a Ozian retelling with Robin of Locksley, good old Robin Hood. So Alan the Duck, which gets a laugh every time my mom hears it, so that stays. He's goofy. You ask Gilly about Alan, she says, oh, he's goofy. You might ask Big Brace about Alan, and he's an ostentatious little guy. So these are core traits that the writer can go into and say, all right, it's sort of a shortcut, but it's also personality. We really boil it down to 1 or 2 key words at that moment. And that's because it's easy to remember, and it's a nice little shorthand. Now, like I said at the beginning, or at least I think I said at the beginning, 90% of these are just straight up cheat codes. These are just quick and down and dirty ways for the author to kind of grab a hold of the character. They use what they want, they reject what they don't, and they put the personalities in. They use these just as stepping stones. And because they're just stepping stones, I lay all of these stairs out for them because I don't know which one they're going to step on first to keep going. So that's core traits. Somebody might say Gilly is creative, and she's reliant. And then last but not least, although sometimes it's least, is a thing we call a little fun project we do here, where we try to come up with a verb to really accent the character with a single verb that they would fall back to, given everything going crazy, and they don't have time to think about it, or they're in a neutral place where they're not really thinking. Basically, when they're not thinking, what action would they perform? Because the verb's an action, right? So, Alan the Duck might perform. He might strum a little bit on his guitar, or he might hum a little bit, or he might go over lines in his head. Gilly might hide. And by hide, I don't mean literally hide behind things. She might hide from a conversation. She might hide, but she might actually hide behind things. She might hide from a conflict. She might hide her emotions. We take a single verb like follow, big brace. Not only does he follow leadership, but he'll follow the word of someone who's close to him. He might follow somebody through the city. They're another little cheat code thing, so that if the author's like, I really can't seem to grab a hold of Gilly, I'm not connecting with her, it gives them something they can always fall back to, so that Gilly's not necessarily dominating this chapter. She's in it, and you want to show her. You can do the quirk, but if the quirk doesn't make sense, you ask yourself, what's she doing? Well, she's hiding from the conversation. Someone has to drag her into the conversation. Or Fire Talk is protect, and he might not just protect you physically. He might protect your emotions by not telling you things. It's a cute little thing I'd learned at some writers conference somewhere that kind of stuck with me, and it becomes a shorthand when we're plotting. It's hard to remember all of this when we're doing the plotting. It's easy to remember a verb if we know that Gilly is going to hide. Well, we can just have her hiding here in this plot for a moment to buy us time while we sort out. Now, if there's 2 or 3 or 4 people in the novel, then the verbs are nowhere near as important. But in a cast of 30, and there are casts of 30 in a few of our fantasy novels, that can be a real quick, easy way. You tie it into the quirk, you use the quirk, or you use the verb, and that definitely helps accent the character, extenuate, whatever. It helps show the character a little better, and also, more importantly, helps us get through the major plot. I'm pointing over here where there's nothing, and I didn't even use my sword. I should be pointing with my sword. What you're eventually going to see is you'll see how we actually do the actual outlines and plots and things, and that will be it'll be to the right usually of this, because we're going to keep working. The wall itself, in case you're curious, the wall itself is metal, and then we use little magnet thumbtacks to kind of hold them up. And that's so that we can move these cards around super easy, because once you start actually plotting, it's just a wherewithal free-for-all of sliding things around, because that chapter now needs to be in front of that chapter. And yes, we do everything by hand. Somebody is in here writing, and until we get this done, the wall gets fuller and fuller, and then it gets transferred into a computer where we polish it and then go over it with the author if they weren't helping plotting in the first place. That's all stuff for a later date. I hope this recorded. I hope it recorded my voice. I hope it wasn't too shrill. I hope you find time to read. I hope you find time to write. And hope you have time to come with us and smell the roses in our story garden.